Definitely, I feel the moment the 1 hour in the morning at the Franchise India annual show, which is really all about the franchise community and the learning of the franchise community for the way for the year to come. So, what in a nutshell, and I've got a great panel over here. I was talking to them backstage, and they gave me some great ideas about what's happening in their markets and what they fundamentally see as the franchise trends of the future and what is going to change probably in the franchising that we currently understand and what is the franchising of the future trends, the future concepts, the future ways and the processes of doing franchising. So it's going to be an interesting panel I'm going to have with all of them. Um, this is all about the industry. This panel, this talk, this meet that we do, which is Power Breakfast, is really all about the industry. So I'm gonna leave it very open as a format for the next 40 minutes. If you have a question, if you would like to add a point, please just show a hand and let's make it as open as possible. And we'd love to hear more ideas. This is learning for all of us, and this is as as sort of transparent when we can get about the learnings that we acquire in our franchise businesses and our daily franchise processes. So I think if you have a point to make or if you would like to add something, please feel free to do so. Just show a hand and we love to hear more about it. So to take the things forward with the panel, I'm going to first start with Tony. Tony, you've been into more than 20 years into franchising and you've seen it globally. You've built a brand which has been in global markets. You've seen India when franchising was just starting out. So what fundamentally one you see as a difference that has come to happen in franchising as practice from there to now in terms of the recruitment of the franchisee or the service of the franchisee or the way the franchisee is really what he's looking at in a concept to vis-a-vis what he was looking, let's say, many years back. So what do you think has changed?
Yeah, I think a lot of things have changed over the time that I've been in franchising, and particularly for the Indian market as well. I think going back when I first got involved with this market in the early 2000s, I think that there was, when we actually met with people and talked about franchising, the first exercise we'd have to do is explain what franchising is. It was quite a foreign business model. And so I think that there's been a huge amount, obviously, of awareness and education of the value of franchising and the capacity to be able to scale a business. So from a domestic side, I see the market has grown substantially, and I see the market has grown from pretty basic type franchising, that firstly understanding the franchise industry, and then applying that to an industry that people understood, such as food and so forth, or education, that could be easily scaled. And I see now there's an opportunity of a lot of people looking for a lot more than just those basics, because the disposable income of the typical Indians is growing and the consumption is growing in this market. And so there's a lot more desire and appetite for lifestyle type brands as well, and specialty service type brands. So that's one area I see. I think the other thing I've seen that I've really noticed is that franchisors who are coming into this market have changed their perspective a lot as well, because back in the days in the early 2000s, when I was involved in this market, a lot of the brands that I would speak to would say, I want to go to India, and if there's 1 billion people there, I have to get a small percentage and I'll be very successful. And I think that what Gaurav mentioned is very relevant. It is a large market, but it's a very fragmented market. And in fact, when we first started the brand that we brought to India, we did a market research on the opportunity for that coffee brand. And out of 1.2 billion people, we then analysed it and actually determined that our target market was 30 million out of 1.2 billion. So having this awareness that it's a big market, it's not just one country, and it's countries within countries really, is a lot of franchisors are now getting a better understanding of the market here, and platforms such as Franchise India make it a lot more easier for brands to come in and participate in shows like this.
Sure. I think he's right. There was a time when we were just trying to explain about 15 years back to people what franchising really is. From there to now, where we find concepts in technology, concepts which are very, very futuristic, also getting into franchising. There's been a sea change in India that we have seen in franchising. So I think this is when the market becomes mature, when the awareness of the concept is high enough, it is also an opportunity for all of us to be able to maximize it. This is probably, so Bill is here and Bill is from the US. Bill, I would say that the Indian franchising is probably at a juncture at what probably the US franchising was in 2000, not the 60s, year 2000, I would say.
It's starting to explode.
Yes.
And so many people want to get here. And so what you're seeing is brands that 10 years ago didn't look at India now say tier 2 was one of the big conversations. Now you're seeing tier 2 brands saying, wow, there is something here in this great economy.
So, so I would love to hear from you as to, considering that you are from the US and that's where most of the franchise learning, not just for India, but for most of the world has sort of come to happen. So what has changed in the US franchising and what can the rest of the world learn from it in terms of practices, in terms of concepts, in terms of newer things happening within the franchise industry, which you think could be relevant for the Indian market as well?
Well, that's an excellent question. I think the big change is the attitude of America that they're the only ones that can franchise successfully around the world. I think it was a great start, but there are bright people who are hardworking, understand franchising now, and they're from all over the world, and they're taking their brands all around the world. So I think that's the biggest thing companies are now learning. The biggest thing also that in my years that is now changing is that just because it works in America a certain way doesn't mean it works the same way everywhere else around the world. So we talked about localization. Yes. Any brand to be successful, no matter what country you want to do business in, has to understand that there is some core things that are unique to your brand that you don't want to fundamentally ever change. However, you need to be adaptable to understand the different taste, expectations, and consumer that you're dealing with in that part of the world and adapt your brand to that and not think your brand is the only way it can be done.
Sure. And what are the newer concepts that you think never existed in the US are now being seen in the country? And why do you think those concepts sort of became so popular? Do you think they have a relevance to the rest of the world too?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is technology has driven new types of consumerism. One of the big ones is that we talked about was the ability now for people to do everything via their phone and never have to leave their house and get anything they ever want. 15 years ago, nobody ever thought about that. Home delivery was where things kind of started, but now what we're seeing is between countries that are technically driving apps and applications and consumer feasibility studies understand that consumers want to do their business a certain way. And one of the ways is they want the ease of being able to do it, which this little device gives them the opportunity to do. They don't ever have to get out of their chair, and they can get hamburgers, they can get books, they can get shoes, they can get clothes, they can get anything. So what I'm starting to see from the innovation part that's coming from is being driven a lot by technology, and that comes from really in our country from California, but you're also seeing it here in India. I'm seeing it in Europe, is that ability to take applications from a technical and a phone point of view and spread it across the world, because guess what? Technology doesn't need borders. You can do it from anywhere.
You were talking about healthcare or maybe for seniors. Where do you think new concepts are sort of showing up?
So the biggest concepts we're seeing starting to leave the United States is really home health care, which is becoming, as populations are beginning to age, there is the need for people to have the feeling of safety for their family. And they want to be able to take care of their parents or a child or somebody. So they want the ability for licensed nurses, doctors that can come to their house rather than being in a hospital and or having to go somewhere else, so that the comfort of their house is there for that thing. And that business is now starting to transfer out. So that's what we're starting to see, especially in Asia.
Um, Troy, I'm going to come to you. So now you understand markets which are probably closer to India. You understand Asia. You understand Middle East. You understand, maybe some part of European market as well. So what do you see in the franchising in these markets, which is sort of, some concepts that you might have seen which were great? I mean, for example, Gaurav mentioned about the Chinese eyewear retailer. So any retail concepts? I know for sure concepts like Pret a Manger and Eat in UK. I mean, they could really do well in India today. The kind of consciousness that we have developed in the last few years about eating and eating right. There's a whole big market waiting to happen. So I mean, considering that you understand India, what concepts do you think could really work well here from overseas? And we've probably this year, with the onslaught of GST and a better tax regime, we're seeing a whole influx of international brands happening in India this year. And I think Venus could also add more to it later. But what concepts do you think could really do well in India? And from outside, they should be looking at the Indian market.
So I think that in response to the question, I think one thing that is becoming very clear is, in terms of franchising, globalization really is the key word in franchising. The more and more international businesses or franchise businesses are expanding all over the world. I think 1 in 5 American outlets for franchises are actually outside of America now in terms of openings. So franchising has really truly become global. When I look at the industry, what I see is that franchising has started to become very specialized, and that more and more different types of businesses are franchising internationally in different segments that before you wouldn't expect to have been franchise businesses, or you wouldn't expect to have seen markets for such businesses in the emerging world. They're very much Western-oriented franchises. Trends that we're seeing that I think will be very relevant in India. In children's education, health and fitness segment, and supplemental learning for kids to help them prepare for school. This is a segment that I think has a big future in this country, with the population and the growing affluence, and the fact that you have a very young population. So businesses that are catering to the needs of parents who want to give their kids a head start, or help their kids stay fit and healthy in an era where kids are becoming very sedentary because of video games and apps and using the phones all the time instead of getting out and exercising. In the services segment, one thing we're seeing is that, for example, fitness, the big box concepts seem to be getting pushed aside for specialized fitness concepts, whether it's kickboxing or cycling or aerobics or yoga. And these are brands that cater to consumers who are looking for something that's very, very targeted towards what their preferences are, as opposed to 30,000 square foot big box concept. And when you look at the word big box, you're seeing that across other segments. You're seeing fashion start to become more fragmented and segmented. The beverage industry, the ice cream industry are all starting to become more specialized. So I think that when you look at the opportunities for India and what the future holds, I think it really is taking a good look at the evolution of franchising in these other markets, and saying, okay, what applies specifically to the Indian market? And I think you'll find that a lot of these trends are spot on relevant for the Indian market. So I won't speak to specific brands, but just the whole concept of specialization, fragmentation, health and fitness, children's education, food brands that offer more healthy options or choices, beverage brands that offer cold pressed juice, as an example, is is a segment that I think is going to grow here, starting to grow all over the world, giving people a chance to have something that's refreshing but also healthy. So these are the kind of segments I would focus on.
So Venus, you work with a lot of international brands. You help them in coming to India at Fran Global. So what is the kind of attraction that you're seeing in terms of the Indian investor looking to invest in an international business model? What kind of models are they sort of very keen on? They would love to bring from the global market, and I'm sure it works reverse. You tell them that this is available, and they tell you whether this could possibly be something that they could bring from outside of India. So what is it that Indian business investor is sort of more keen on investing in terms of a global brand? And secondly, how do you see franchise models changing? I mean, do you find that the global brand is more open to partnerships? Is he a little more flexible in terms of doing partnerships with the Indian investor? What sort of affinity have you seen developing between a global brand and an Indian partner?
Sure. Thank you, Ritu. I'd like to start by first thanking the FranCorp India team. I think it takes a lot to have a room full of franchisors at 7 o'clock or 8 o'clock in the morning. So I think congratulations to FranCorp India team. I think because my work involves primarily working with international brands and Indian sort of franchisors and Indian investors, primarily sort of combining and matchmaking these two. So I will come to your sort of a question, but I want to drive sort of three major points where I'll try to address the question. So three things, according to me, sort of are driving both the international and the domestic part of the franchise industry. I'll start with the first one. The first one being consumption. I think, of course, and I'll sort of compare the world's oldest and the largest democracy between these two, because America is the biggest consumer of the world, and they really are the big bosses of consumption. And India, of course, have the highest number. But I think although we have numbers, but we are consuming in a sort of a bit different manner. For example, I was just discussing with the group that America consumes, like per capita consumption in America for ice cream is 33 pounds per person. Can you believe that? So Indians, of course, we are nowhere near that number, but we are not just consuming this like one ice cream. Indians are consuming gelatos. We are consuming organic ice cream. We are consuming a nitrogen ice cream, and also yogurt. So I think the consumption pattern of India is not incremental, but actually disruptive. I just read a story, it was done in Quads India, that through Geo, India has consumed in last 6 months data equivalent to what US consumer consumes in 1 year. I mean, it's mind-boggling. So I think a franchising industry overall inherently has been driven by consumption. So franchise companies and both on the domestic side and people who are sort of trying, and we speak with in terms of getting international brands to India, sort of are need to kind of understand the way the Indian consumer is sort of really consuming. And another thing which I'm really sort of finding out, because I speak to a lot of sort of investors who are not just sort of in India, but also Indians. We have such a big diaspora, Indians abroad, and they have such a big, deep demand for great Indian concepts. So I would really, and I know there's a lot of Indian franchisor community that that develop your concepts. Of course, for India is such a great market, but there's absolutely a great demand for great Indian brands in food, in fashion, in services. It's not just the IT, but we have so much to offer to the world, and there are audience who are ready to sort of take it outside India. And eventually, I think we should even aspire more. That even I would say in fashion we have brands like High Design or Da Milano and many others. I mean, why can't they have sort of multiple 100 stores in US, Canada, and Australia, and other places? So, no, so I think eventually the life cycle and a franchisor, either it's a startup franchisor or a mature franchisor, I think try and see if your consumption is based in India, but there's a consumption outside India also, and if you can actually drive your sort of expansion strategy out of that. I'm happy to say that there's a certain amount of Indian franchisors who are sort of working towards that, and I'm really happy about that. So that's the first point, consumption. The second point, which I want to include, is it's called regulation. Again, bringing the America back to it, America actually, because it's the home ground for franchising. I was speaking to Troy, and so I asked him that, since when franchising has been regulated in America. So he told me it started, I think, in the 60s, 70s with UFOC, which was Uniform Franchise Offering Circular. So that's how this started, and in the 90s it converted to the FDD, Franchise Disclosure Document. So the industry is like 45 years, it's regulated, it's standardized. But in India, I think in my experience, franchising is purely driven by demand, and I think that is what we have to offer, So, but it comes to us, the franchisor, to sort of drive the industry, to self-regulate ourselves, to standardize, to be compliant, so that the brand actually has a longer life cycle in India and outside also. And actually, that's where a lot of when I speak to investors in India, that's what they're looking for. Is that when they look at an international brand, they primarily are buying into not just the product, but the IP, the standardization, the experience and expertise which sort of they would bring. So that's the second point. The third point, which I think is relevant, especially in today's world, is communication. I just read somewhere recently. I'm reading a book. Is called "The Whole World is a Fast-Breaking Story These days." So we have to. I remember, when I got into franchising 10 years back. So I got to know that in the earlier days, franchisors used to just publish an ad and wait in a 5-star hotel room, and there used to be a line to meet franchisees. But I guess a Franchise India actually has done such a great job to yesterday you saw, today you will see. It's all democratized, and people are not just putting booths. You see Indian franchisors really building sort of these, spending money and in sort of doing these great booths. So communication, I think, is really changing. It's changing fast. I have a 22-year-old analyst in my team, and she has 11,000 followers in her Instagram. And she's a food blogger, apart from being a business analyst. So brands really need to sort of. And the communication is going to drive us. It's going to drive franchising also. There are a lot of brands, so it's not just B2C, but B2B also. We have to, I think, if brands really sort of sort of try and discover that the communication is going to drive your brand, your growth, not just on the B2C side, because you know what? Something opens in Delhi, and then it gets Instagram 10,000 times. People in Mumbai are going to inquire about it. People in Bangalore are going to kind of talk about it. So communication is something which is, I think, is driving, and I know it's very hard because I myself is very old school, but I think it's something which is going to sort of drive it. And again, it's very interconnected. For example, I was talking to Ritu the other day, and I told her that I mean, we used to eat Indian gooseberry when we were children, and now there's a guy in California. He has made Indian gooseberry, it's called Amla in Hindi, into this great organic skincare product line. He got the product, and then Kim Kardashian tweeted it, and again, it got million likes. So I think we need to sort of understand that who is the best audience for our product, and try and see how we can sort of expand it. So yeah. I hope I covered a couple of points.
Yes, I think you did a very good job of it. So happy to see if somebody has a point of view in the audience, would like to share it with us. But continuing our discussion, and I think this could be something which probably today is not so relevant, but maybe in a few years' time, because disruption is all around us. Everything we see, whether it's food or education or any other sector, retail, of course, has been one of the prime examples, is going through disruption. Now, if franchisors don't get innovative enough with their concepts, with their brands, it's quite likely that they would become irrelevant to the audience, because there's a big tech player out there. But I mean, nevertheless, while 2 years ago everybody had started doubting about the whole physical presence of stores in India, but I see it this year. I think everybody, even technology companies, have moved into a offline foray or a retail foray. So there's a huge opportunity in retail. But of course, as they said, being relevant is very important. Gaurav gave a great example of Kodak earlier, that it's Kodak's business model which sort of phased out. It's not photography that phased out. So how are brands trying to do that? How are franchise brands across the world trying to be more relevant to the customer? How are they being able to give food which customers want to eat? How they're giving experience which customers want to take when they go out to eat or shop and so on? So what are the kind of trends that you're seeing in the global markets? Troy, Bill, Tony, would love to hear from each one of you. As to what difference have you seen in brands and their experience, particularly for franchise brands, to be more relevant to the customer?
I call it customization and personalization. So every brand has to evolve this now, because consumers are telling us there are special things they want from the experience that you provide. So in my company's particular case, what we found is that technology is the kind of customization from apps that they want. What they want to know is that you remember them, and you remember what they like. You remember what they don't like. You understand what they want to be able to achieve when they visit your particular establishment. So part of what our technical team has done is allow the ability now for you to order on a phone and be able to walk in, never have to deal with a frontline person, go to a machine, put your phone underneath, automatically pays for it, the door opens up, your pizzas come out, and you walk away. And you never touch a person. Consumers are telling us that's what they want. They want to be able to get in and out with little interaction. And this is really being driven by a lot of millennials, to be honest with you. I think us older people look like we still like the interaction, we still like going to a restaurant. Millennials are not that way. The younger generations, my kids, look at the experience of consumption and buying differently than we do. So that's part of the innovation that we see has to make us disruptive to the industry.
Correct.
Yeah, I think it's a good point, Bill. I see that the more successful franchise brands are those that actually are very customer-centric. And one of the things that I've seen, and I've been involved with some reasonably decent-sized franchise brands of, one of 400 stores, another one of 800 stores plus. And if you're a franchisor out there at the moment and you're starting to build, keep a focus on the customer, because the customer is changing so radically. Their needs and their desires and what they want are changing so radically that it's really easy to stay inside your business model and not really see what's happening. And I'll tell you the other thing that's really significant that I've seen is the more successful brands become much more inside out. So that it's what the board decides, and this is the model that's been successful. So we'll just continue to do this a lot better. And the real disruptive companies are looking outside in. They're looking at what does the customer want and how can I adapt my model. And let me tell you, if you're a 10-store chain, it's reasonably easy to change. But when you're a 400 or 500 store chain, it is really difficult to change, particularly if you've got franchisees as key stakeholders that are bought into this. But your franchisees also have an expectation that you as a franchisor are committed to relevance, are committed to, in essence, disrupt yourself. Because if you're not disrupting yourself, I can guarantee you that there's people out there looking to how to disrupt your industry. It's happening every day. And the problem is that many brands don't realize it's happening until it's too late. That's one. The second thing is that brands that are successful, that are stuck in the way that they've always done it, many times the signs aren't there that their model is broken. right? Because how can my model be broken if I'm still got these record profits? I've still got a successful supply chain. I've still got plenty of customers. I've still got plenty of stores. But in their gut, they know that they need to change. But they haven't built into their system this need for change, this desire to change, this desire to say, what does my customer want? And how do I stay really close to them and change my business model to make sure that I'm consistently delivering it? And if you're a brand out there that gets that, then you'll continue to change, because change is happening so rapidly. If you don't change, then you will be a dinosaur. That's one thing is for sure. And someone will disrupt your industry, so disrupt it yourself is my counsel.
Yeah, I think it would be hard to add too much more than what Bill and Tony have already said. I think that one thing that that brands have to realize is, in terms of I'll use restaurants as an example, the refresh cycle or the evolution cycle for the food industry typically was 5 years, 20 years ago. So every 4 or 5 years, they'd start to take a good look at the brand and say, is it time to remodel our outlets? Is it time to revisit our menu? And you know, the reality is that these days of modern technology and instant information and you know, with the trends evolving the way they are, you know, a refresh cycle for a concept now is probably on store design and imagery is probably 2 years. So you know, by the time you remodel the first restaurant, it's probably, by the time you get to the last one in your system, it's probably time to remodel the first one again. So that's how quick the cycle is evolving. And on the menu side of a food business, what you're seeing is that seasonality is a big term in the food industry, where you plan your cycle based on either cultural seasonality, or it could be weather patterns, summer, winter, spring, fall. You know, that seasonality and the evolution of menus has actually become monthly or quarterly. And again, that's something that is really, really critical in this industry. And if you don't have a team that thinks on their feet and really has their finger on the pulse of the consumers from the point of sale up as opposed to the chairman's office down, it's very easy to get behind the curve and realize in a year or two that what was a very successful business, as Tony said, may not be relevant anymore. So, right? Exactly.
Point to make. Can we please pass on the mic out there?
Good morning. I have a question to Venus. She says about ice cream business is a comparison between US and Indian consumption and all that. When you say quantity-wise, yes, US consumption is very, very high when compared to Indian, but as you rightly said that there is a disruption taking place in India. People are talking about organic ice cream and then yogurt ice cream, then nitrogen ice cream and all that. What is your views about Indian ice cream taking place in the next 5 years from now? Because when you compare with the US, yes, volumes are too small, but yes, we are going in a different direction altogether. We are not following the trend what US followed, and this country is really coming out with disruptive models of business in ice cream trade. This is something very interesting, and we need to understand what is the future is lying for next 5 years in this trade.
Well, maybe I'm not might be the best person to kind of predict trends on the ice cream side, but I will try and sort of relate to what your question is. The panel spoke on disruption. Primarily, I think if you would agree with me, disruption is connected to the technology industry, right? That's the word we say disruptive. It comes to, yes, it's San Francisco, it's the Silicon Valley. But actually, disruption has been happening in franchising in the food industry, not now, but I think for forever. Not just in ice cream industry. I mean, if you see, for me, Chick-fil-A is a disruption because there are hundreds of burger chains offering in America sort of beef burgers, but then there's this chain realize, oh yes, there is a niche, there's a demand in the market for just chicken and sort of chicken primary, with chicken being the primary sort of content. And just look at the brand. Shake Shack for me is a disruption. So I think Troy told me about a concept from California, which is the fried chicken and waffles. So I think for me, these are disruptions, and this applies not just to the ice cream industry, but industry overall. And I think in India, the disruption means that we combine what sort of there's a demand in the market and what is available. I think right now on the frozen dessert sort of category, there is definitely a need on sort of building our capabilities and capacities on the product side. Can we produce really good sort of creamy ice creams, yogurts? There's a lot of sort of import being done on the ingredient side. So I think overall, if you way going forward, of course, again, I'm not the best person to predict how the industry would behave, but that's where if we can build the back end, if we can build the infrastructure, I think that should drive a lot of the industry side, and disruption would happen on the taste, on the presentation, on the availability. I think that should make sense.
Just to give you some, you see, I'm not connected with the business of ice cream, but yes, I am somehow connected with the business because I'm in the line of manufacturing cold chain equipments for ice cream industries and beverage industries. Now, interesting thing I want to tell you that last 3 years, the kind of sales and business has improved in the field of ice cream just because the power is available now across the country, which was not the case. 3 years, 4 years back, the power was available only in the large cities, but now you go to even smaller towns and cities of country, towns of the country, and there is a uninterrupted power supply is there. And that has made a big difference, huge difference. And I'm seeing this a sort of a blast happening. People are coming from unknown places and asking for freezers and coolers and do you want to serve the things. This is something unbelievable, never expected. Thank you.
That's a good observation. You never know when the country is actually changing from within and the business model might become a hit. But in terms of food, I think what is most relevant to understand is that the customer is started eating with his eyes first. So whatever food you are planning to give to your customer, don't worry so much about the quantity or the, what you're going to give to him or the ingredients, but does it look really nice? It really matters today, at least to the very young customer. The QSR chains, which were very used to sort of putting big stuff on your platter, might not be the most, might not be the best business model in the current period of time. And that's where we're seeing chains like Fuzzy Cafes and the likes of them becoming very popular because they worry more on the presentation of the food. So I think so these are some larger trends one needs to sort of, the whole sort of, the popularity of Instagram has actually come because people started putting what they started liking. And, so following it is honestly for me one of the biggest business trend that I get to see about consumerism on Instagram. So, coming to another point that I would like to make is that we've seen a lot of brands sort of run out of gas in their own home country, particularly a lot of American brands. While, they might still be very relevant to markets like Asia or even Middle East, but in their own home countries, they've sort of run out of gas completely. Toys R Us is a great example. India is just planning to open Toys R Us, while they've filed for insolvency out there in the US. So now, while I don't think it is, right to say that they should, even if they're not doing well there, they should come to other markets or developing markets or underdeveloped markets. But the point is that they have a market out here. Now, how can they be relevant to a market like India without, even when sort of they're becoming less relevant in their own markets? Do you see a business model or a business case for that in the coming times? So that a lot of companies might actually start moving to other countries instead of developing too much in their own countries.
I think this is a difficult question. I think that strategically, first and foremost, I think it's understood that you could have a brand in its home market that starts to struggle while it has partnerships in other countries via franchising that are actually outperforming the home market. I think fundamentally that's the case with many, many brands. I worked for a business called Gloria Jean's Coffees. Tony and I worked together where the Australian franchisee outgrew the parent company in America and then bought the parent company and then went on to develop that brand in 42 countries. So that's an example of a brand failing or suffering in its home market that went on to be successful. But that was a unique situation because the Australians actually bought the intellectual property and then they used the innovations that had made them the market leader in Australia to then go out and grow the brand internationally. And the U.S. then still continued to lag behind. But in the Toys R Us scenario that we just discussed, or in the broader scenario, I think that a brand has to have three things fundamentally going for it to be able to succeed in international franchising. And often when people consult with us on international franchising, they start talking about their manuals and their processes and their systems. And I have three fundamental questions for them. Are you profitable? Are you committed? And are you competitive? And in terms of competitive, are you in the top three or four, a position of top three or four in your segment? I think fundamentally, if I were going to invest in a franchise and I looked at the brand and said, I think it will work in my country, but they're not profitable, competitive, or committed to growing the business in their home country, my advice to the investor would be don't touch it. Because even though you might be able to take the model and grow it in your country, you're not going to be able to rely on the principal or the parent company for any ongoing innovation or ongoing leadership. And the reason is because you're doing something different or you're achieving a different methodology to allow you to be successful in the home market. So if you're going to pay royalties and share your income stream with the parent company, you need to be getting something in return from that in terms of ongoing commitment to service you as a international franchisee across technology, across innovation, across leadership, product development. And if they're struggling in their home market, then you're not going to be their priority. They're going to be hoping that you contribute to their income by paying the royalties on a monthly basis, but probably not spending a lot of time and effort helping you grow your business and probably managing their resources to the point where they don't have a big international team. So my position on it would be that I would never invest or recommend an investor invest in a brand that isn't succeeding in their own home market, because the future is too unpredictable to determine what the long-term opportunity might look like. Yep.
Great analogy, and I would just add to it, after working in this industry for the number of years in different brands, it's about foundation. And foundation means that you have all the core competencies in place. And one of the things, Gordy, that you mentioned today, training, I think is the critical piece that most companies always take for granted and shouldn't. And so as you see Toys R Us, what they got was disrupted. And who was their biggest disruptor? Amazon. And they forgot that they figured everybody would want to go to their units, and they did one time a year, and that was during Christmas. But you have 11 other months you need to operate and pay the bills. And they lost that. They forgot about that. So Amazon forced Toys R Us to think differently. And now you see them starting to react. I believe Toys R Us will be successful outside of the USA because the traditional model still has relevancy and it can work. However, there will be other companies that will come along and do the same thing. If they don't figure out the technical piece and how to make the accessibility to their websites or to their ordering apps and allow the ability to act quasi-Amazon, Toys R Us will fail in the end. So that's the biggest concern I would have. And add to Troy, it's really about foundational, make sure your company supports and grows, but more importantly, you are just as important to them as they are to you.
Not a lot more I can add. I would agree with Troy on the basis that you really do need to have a strong franchisor if you're actually going to continue to pay them royalties, because at the end of the day, that's what you're paying royalties for. You're paying for support of helping you and your market to leverage the success of the brand that they've had in their home market. Although the only disclaimer I would give on that would be that in some markets, brands have suffered because other brands have come up, or different dynamics in that economy have shifted that market, and in other markets that brand could be very relevant. And we've got one example in Australia of a large casual dining brand called Sizzler that has just gone down. It was extremely popular 10, 15 years ago. In fact, to the point where people would line up for an hour waiting for a table. And over time, competition came in and slowly eroded that, and now they're closing them. In fact, they're just about all closed. But a partner in Thailand took their brand, and it's been extremely successful. It's done phenomenally. In fact, their Thailand brand on just in a couple of stores are doing more than any of their Australian stores. One, because it's a good partner, really understands food, and they have a freedom to actually adapt their model into that market. And two, just the life cycle of where that particular market of Thailand is, that people were looking for that type of offer. And the real thing that killed them in Australia was the labour cost, whereas in Thailand the labour cost wasn't a major impact. So whilst as a principle it is true that it's probably not a good idea to take a brand if it's failing in its home country and you're looking for a lot of support, but there are opportunities where it can still work.
Sure. That's a good point. So you wanted to make a point?
Yes. Good morning, everyone. Actually, I wanted to ask one thing, particularly when you're a brand and you want to make sure the experience of the customer is same across the store. And when it's a product driven, it's probably okay. But when it's a service driven, how do you ensure and what kind of check processes you want to put in so that the customer gets the same experience, maybe in the online store as well as your offline stores?
I think, it's when you start talking about online service, I think it really is a much different conversation than service in a retail environment. So they're really two different answers to two different questions, in my opinion. But I think that one word that comes to mind in listening to your question is institutionalized focus. If you're going to succeed in the multi-unit retail business, whether you're across food or services or retail, or multi-unit franchise business, regardless of the segment, you have to instill a certain institutionalized focus on what's important in servicing your customers step by step. And that has to start from the leadership, and it has to be given attention at every level of the organization, and surely training and giving the employees access to the information they need, and them understanding why it's important are critical to that process. The biggest challenge in managing a multi-unit business is that the key leadership can't be everywhere all the time. And you're relying on really store managers who, in my opinion, in the franchise industry, are the most important people in the business. Obviously, the leadership is critical, but if your managers on a unit-by-unit basis don't take the institutionalized focus, which comes to them by way of systems, tools, and processes, and don't drive those messages home to the team at the stores, then you'll get inconsistencies across service, food quality, or product quality, which will affect the competitiveness of the business. So I hope that answers your question.
Another point which might actually become relevant for a lot of Indian franchisors is that uniquely there are a lot of Indians, not just in India, but there are a lot of Indians outside India too. So you'll find in many countries there's a huge Indian diaspora that exists. And so it might be relevant for some of the brands, particularly which have a great global appeal to the business, to also look outside India. I mean, the point that they made about Sizzlers or Toys R Us. So, it's something that one needs to understand from day one, that I might have a market outside India and might want to explore it. So it's maybe going global. That is something that we've been talking about in these forums for many years. But now maybe the time has really come for us to understand that if there is an Indian market for my brand outside India, I might as well look at that franchise opportunity too. Have you seen something on these lines earlier?
Yeah, I totally agree with that, Ritu. I think there's, in the country that I'm from Australia, there's just a number of Indian population that's just exploded there in the last 10, 15 years, primarily off the back of students that have come and stayed. And see just even the whole Indian dine-out experience is still very much back in the 80s. And it's, even in that industry itself, there's a market there and it's crying out for someone to create an organised, great experience for Indian consumers, but not only Indian consumers, it's the Australian consumer that loves Indian food, but probably don't want to go down to the dodgy little restaurant takeaway down the street, and which are mainly takeaways now. So creating a casual dining experiences and seeing how Indian brands can come into that market and adapt their model to fit what the needs of that market is, both for the Indian diaspora and also local consumers.
Sure. I think adding on to Tony's point, and it's not just about brands going outside India. There are now a fair amount of audience who are the Indian Australian or Indian American or Indian English sort of audience who are actually bringing their sort of brands, the brands which they know. I think we might have somebody in audience. So from Australia, these are sort of they were living in Australia. Now they're bringing a gym brand to India. So I think this business is happening not just on one way, but both the ways. But I think I agree with Tony. I just got to know about a brand in the US. So this Indian American, I think in San Francisco, which is sort of the Indian food which Americans like, and now she set up a couple of stores and she's franchising now. So absolutely, I think if we are able to sort of package our product into a manner which kind of suits us as well as the population outside India, I mean, there's a bigger audience.
Yeah, good one.
And I'll add on to that. So in the U.S., you've got an opportunity with a built-in customer base that already exists. Like you said, the Indian Americans are in Canada. And I think you have an opportunity to seize your businesses and move them and allow yourself to expand the foundation of your business, because you do have a built-in customer base. What we were talking about earlier was people call it westernization. I don't know if that's the right term to use, but it's how do you adapt, no different than any U.S. company that comes to India, is localization. So how do you make the localization work in a different country? Do the research, do the work, make sure you understand it. But I believe it's a great opportunity for many of your companies here to expand beyond India now, and especially in the United States. To Indian parents in the United States that still long for a touch of home, because that's what they grew up with. And I think there's a great opportunity for that.
So I know we pretty much run out of time out here. If there are some quick questions one would like to ask, I can take it up. Yes, please.
Yeah, good morning. Our company, Embre, we are in a home furnishing. So if I give a brochure so you can understand the product. So,
That's what we'd like to see, a salesman at work, eh?
so something I have some questions so at least to understand the product. Yeah. My question is that we are doing export to European countries like chain Lidl and Shibo, I think Europe, and also just recently we launched a brand in India, last couple of months back, and we also would like to enter through franchises channel. So I need some suggestion from your ends. Like, what is the possibility? How should we enter in international market as well as domestic market? since 18 years we are in export of all kind of products like bed linen, kitchen linen, table linen, all range. And we have huge capacity to produce and distribute to all over world as well as to India. So I need a deep suggestion from your end. Yes, Ali. Thank you.
We're going to need an hour. It's a great question, and you know what? Please find me, and I'll be more than happy to give you some ideas. In this form, we could talk about it for a day, I think, right? About how to enter other places and kind of the foundational pieces you take and do. But I think the fundamentals is the important part. Doing all the right work up front. So many companies make the mistake of looking at it as a cost rather than an investment. It's an investment in growing your brand because the returns are what you're looking to get by growing market share. And that would be the thing I would tell you, starting from your first thought, is what's the investments I need to make to grow my brand beyond X? And then the most second important thing, be strategic. You can't go everywhere in the world. Where is the best market opportunities defined by your product, consumer research, and strategic prioritization of where you want to go? That's what I would add.
Just real quickly, I would say two things. One is that that if you're an experienced manufacturer, so you forward integrated is my understanding. You were in manufacturing and distribution, and now you've taken that forward and created a brand. I think first and foremost, international expansion is a brand equity strategy. It's not a cash flow strategy. So be clear on that. If you're going to expand internationally, don't expect it to drive cash flow. Expect it to build brand equity and image, and then the cash flow will follow. As opposed to if you have to expand to raise cash, that's probably you have a bigger problem internally. You need to analyze. I'm not suggesting that's your problem, but that's something a company needs to look at. The other thing I would say is if you've been in business for this many years and you have this distribution network, tap into that. Use your existing relationships around the world, people who've been buying your products, and use them to get a head start in finding partners in those countries where your products have already been sold and accepted. Those would be my 2 words of advice for you.
And I'll just add a few more as well. Presumably, as your experiences in manufacturing, distribution, export, and so forth, is having not only a brand, which you've got reputation, in other words, is actually having a business model that actually fits into franchising. Okay, so you've got systems, tools, and processes. You've got a proof of concept that you can point to that's not a distribution company, but is an actual brand that you're going to replicate globally. Because if you don't have that, then you really just got a good reputation, right, without a brand. So that's really important. The other thing I would say that's really critical in franchising is, and you've already got it built into your model, is a supply chain. So a lot of retailers start brands and thinking, I'll just create my income off my profitability in my stores. The really successful brands build in a supply chain model into their business, and we've been involved in a couple that have gone through to sale. And the brand is one, but the real money's made out of the supply chain, right? So it's really important to have this built into your model. You've already got the foundations. It's now just a question of how you overlay it with a system and a brand that's more or less a retail brand. You can point people towards it to say, not only do I have a reputation, but I have a brand model, and it works. Now I'm going to replicate this in your market, and this is how you do it. This is how I've done it. This is how you do it. And with that, I'd see that your biggest market is going to be not only the retail side, but the fact you can actually distribute and supply. And will be a fantastic business model for a potential partner as well, because if they want to franchise in their market, they can buy off you, and hopefully there's enough margin in it to make a supply margin for them as well.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, so with that, we come to the end of a very fruitful discussion there. So let's have a huge round of applause to thank all of our speakers, first up. And while I'm going to request you all to remain on the stage, I'm also going to invite Mr. Gaurav Maurya to please come on stage, as we'd like to now take the opportunity to celebrate the launch of Francast 2018, the Franchise Forecast 2018. So this is a report. In fact, it's a white paper, which is an assessment of the innovations and developments across businesses, and also explores the upcoming franchise opportunities in India. So we're going to distribute these reports to all of our dignitaries on the stage. And we'll take the opportunity to officially unveil it for all of you. So let's have a huge round of cheer there, ladies and gentlemen, as we officially unveil the reports to all of you, for all of you. And we also have the copies of it available outside, so towards the end of the program, you may collect it. But first up, I'm also going to request Ritu Maria to please present these token of gratitude to all of our speakers for their valuable presence and for joining us this morning for the Power Breakfast session. We'd also like to inform you all that the feedback forms have been placed in your kit. So we're going to request you to please fill in the feedback forms. And as you proceed towards the exit door, you may hand over the feedback forms to our team members, and you can collect the copies of the Francast 2018. The reports are outside. So please hand over the feedback forms. Please duly fill it up. We take our feedback very seriously. So please fill them up, and you can hand it over outside and collect the reports as well. And with that, we'll get started with the day 2 of the Opportunity India Summit as well for the delegates of the Opportunity Summit. We're going to get started in the next 10 minutes. Thank you very much for joining us for a very, very enriching session. Thank you.